Andy, I'll return. Thank you.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Kathy, roll call, please.
Carter. Here. Walther.
Here.
Howe.
Here.
Barstow.
Here.
Hayes. Here. Hicken.
Here.
Lee.
Okay, we have a quorum present. The purpose of this meeting tonight is to discuss primarily an update on the progress of our comprehensive plan. So I'll turn that over to Mr. Scott Fulton.
Well, I think I'd introduce our consultant, Aaron Dominy with OHM.
All right, very good. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Make this full screen here.
If you just give me your,
That's it.
just give me your name and address
Sure.
for a little kind of a reference point.
Aaron Dominy, I'm with OHM Advisors. I live in Worthington at 770 Morning Street.
Good evening, sir.
Thank you for having me.
How are you?
I'm good.
Well, we're pretty pumped up. The whole city's pumped up about this, so we had a special meeting just for you guys.
I was definitely pump up the jam as I got up here. I said there's never a good night for a meeting, although it's Monday and it's kind of raining and it's
Perfect
like
night.
actually feels like okay to be stuck in a meeting, doesn't it? I know you guys do this a lot and it's countless hours to be serving your community, so sure they're very thankful and thank you for you having me here to update you on this. When we put our proposal together, we built into the process kind of a checkpoint with you along this journey. And here we are to kind of update you at that checkpoint. So tonight's not about delivering you any kind of final plan or document, but it's to tell you what we've been up to and then allow you some time to ask us some questions. So I'm going to pull my phone out here so I can keep myself on track because I know that clock's behind me. So if I'm looking at this, it's because I'm checking the time. My goal would be to talk about 45 minutes and then leave about 15 for Q&A. Does that sound okay? All right. There's a lot to cover. We've been busy. So today, what I'd like to do is kind of cover these key points here, which is kind of the introduction, which is very brief. We'll spend a fair amount of time talking about all the engagement we've done with the community. It's been pretty extensive. Some of the existing conditions that we've looked at, and then we've started to create the plan. So I'll give you a sneak peek about how that's coming together and let you know that it's a draft work in progress. And we have some committee members here in the audience, 2 of them, that are working with us as well. So it's great that they came. So one of the things I just wanted to start with is just reset the compass about what this is. And really our objective is to build a blueprint that's going to carry you forward for the next 10 to 20 years. And this plan having a very heavy land use component or focus to it. Given kind of where you're at as a community, what your need is. That's really been a key focus of ours from a consulting team as well as the steering committee. And what is this plan really working to do? Really working to kind of create that unified vision for where you want to go and then how you want to get there. So obviously, Patasko's in a little bit different situation. I was talking to BJ in the hallway about the other plans and communities I work with. And you have a lot of potential. There's a lot of ground here that's undeveloped, and there's a lot to think about in terms of that perspective. So it's also to provide that guidance to both public and private sector. So public sector, where you need to make investments, private sector, where can they go, where can they make investment, and what is the expectation. Steer public dollars to spur private investment. There's one thing I want to talk about where that public-private really will come together with this plan. Identify areas that you want to protect, and then ultimately this should all be improving quality of life. Our process is here, there's 5 phases. We went from preparing for the plan to understanding the context. So that's kind of the technical analysis piece, which I'll share with you. Phase 3 was listening to the community, and we're in phase 4, where all those things come together. So it's kind of like baking a cake. So essentially what we did was put all the ingredients out on the counter, and that took a long time because we had a messy kitchen. And then we baked the cake. So that's where we are. And phase 5 is finalizing the plan, setting up implementation. We'll bring it back to you guys. This has been our schedule. We added actually a meeting along the journey. The more we learn about you, and where we realized there's the east and the west side, and there's sometimes we need to make things more convenient for each side, so we had another meeting on the west side, and that took place on August 8th. And then here we are on the 17th for the elected officials meeting. Well, one more public open house to reveal the draft plan. In terms of how this plan is coming together and what the roles are, there are a number of key players here from our steering committee, which is really intended to guide and inform how the plan comes together. And those are folks who live here and are advising us along the way, taking the information we're giving to them and helping us make informed decisions. I like to think of our job as being that wagon master, where their job is really to put the plan together. We just feed the information, we run the process, and ultimately they have to validate the direction. Staff and officials obviously providing leadership and insight along the way. Planning consultant, our job, I mentioned. We had some stakeholders. We did a couple of small group meetings with stakeholders here, and then we have the public, which also provides insight and sets priorities for the plan. So in terms of the ingredients that we put on the table, here are those ingredients: the public input and the community survey, existing conditions and kind of the technical analysis piece, and then the other piece is best practices, which we are thinking about as your consultant, trying to bring you examples to your community. These are things you should be thinking about. So the public engagement side of things, I think went pretty well, and I'll share with you a statistic of how well it went. We did a number of things to kind of make the community aware of the opportunity to get engaged here. So that was the city website, city Facebook page. We mailed postcards to registered voters for meetings. We had a series of business cards we passed out to let people know how they could get to the website. We did an airdrop with a Goodyear blimp, dropped them all over the city. People picked them up, went online. And then the word of mouth. And I know that's worked because that's in part how we had added additional public meeting, is people learning about what was happening here. And there's an example of one of the pieces of collateral we put together. So by the numbers, this is who we talked to. One of the things we did in lieu of just having a meeting here is we went to the farmer's market. We talked to about 40 people at the market to get their ideas and perspective on the future. We did 3 stakeholder meetings in this room with folks that we identified together with staff and others, folks that we should talk to. We kind of have a vested interest here, or the ability to really transform the future. So these are people we didn't want to lose at a public meeting, so we took a special care to talk to them. On the community survey, we had about 900 people respond, so that's pretty awesome. And then all told, we talked to about 6.5% of the population. So if anybody does any surveying or statistics in the room, we know that that's pretty good to talk to 6.5% when you go through a process like this. So what did they say? This is the summary of the in-person engagement. So that was farmers market, stakeholder meetings, and the public meeting. These are some of the things that they said. We asked a couple of key questions. One was, what do you think some of the current issues are, and what do you think some of the opportunities are for Pataskala? These aren't all of them. These are how we summarize them, kind of the key themes. And you'll see these kind of come up later as we unveil to you the land use plan. You should see how these get translated in. The first one that came up was this lack of identity or brand, kind of not knowing exactly what the brand of the community is right now. And so that was something that was brought up in different ways, and we summarized it that way. There is some concern for if you grow, does that bring a new crime? So that was mentioned a couple of times. Traffic being of top of mind. This idea of not having a central gathering space, pretty interesting. I thought I knew Pataskala pretty well, but then I did learn of kind of this east side, west side, and how that has come into this planning initiative and how we factored that in. But also, you know, where does everybody go? Is it the village? Is it the downtown? Is it someplace new? That's something we explored more. Limited housing options, lack of infrastructure to support growth was a concern. Physical and cultural divide, too spread out, and the lack of connectivity being an issue. And you'll see that come back around later too. Lack of entertainment things to do. If I've not heard that in every project that I've done, I would be lying. So it doesn't surprise me it came up. And then the pressure of the growth on city services and schools was also discussed. On the opportunity side, where do you go? What are the things that you'd like to see here? Again, you'll see some of the issues are opportunities. So the first one was, do we create a central gathering place? How do we attract visitors? How do we attract new business, and where do they go? How do you leverage your location within the Columbus region? Expand and increase parks and green space, being an opportunity, something people would like to see. Adding more diversity to the housing types, and then maintaining your small town feel while densifying main corridors. So those were some of the key findings from the word of mouth conversations. You see one of our staff members there facilitating at the public meeting. We tried to make these meetings fun and engaging, so the format was about 20-minute presentation and then small group work and then move around the room and do different activities. One of the things we asked at the meeting was where do you want to grow as a community? So everybody would put dots on the boards, identify places to grow. Obviously Broad being one of those, 310 being one of those places, and then interestingly enough, a cluster here around kind of where we sit here at the municipal complex. But very little preference for growth north of Broad Street. And then where do we want to, what are areas that we want to preserve? So preservation throughout the city, especially north and south rural corridors being identified, and then cluster near parks and schools. Found that. So one of the things that we asked here, and this kind of was birthed out of the stakeholder meetings, with understanding of this lack of center in the east and west, and where's the downtown, what is the downtown? We asked the question, where is the downtown or your city center, or where should it be? On the survey, 60% of those who took that survey of the 895 folks said they thought it was Old Town or the Old Village. 18% don't think you have a downtown. And then if we asked them where they thought it should be, that's where all those dots fell on the map. So obviously cluster around that 60% where they thought it was, but then this other cluster here on the municipal complex. So looking at the survey, again, 895 responses. We had it open for 6 weeks. There were 20 questions. And if you're really curious, it took 10 minutes and 9 seconds for the average person to take that survey. So this is who we talked to. You can see the breakdown there. On the gender side, a little bit more female than male. And then the age spectrum, pretty interesting. Typically, this cohort of 65 and older is the one that takes it the most. But interestingly enough, if you actually look at who you are as a community, the 35 to 45, you exceed the county on and your neighbors. That's actually a bigger age cohort here than in your neighboring cities and the county. So we had a big bump there. 50% currently have children in their household, 92% are homeowners, and 90% do not live with family members other than their spouse or children. So we asked that because it's a generational question. We're finding trends where mom and dad are still living with you and things like that. Where do you live? This was one where we tried to geographically code the respondents because we learned along the way that we want to make sure we have that good cross-section of the folks we talk to. So if you look at the, number 4, having a heavy concentration of 42%, but if you add the 2 up, 2 and 4, you can see on the east side, you have 55%, so pretty good distribution on the east and west. I know that. I'm bringing that up because it came up when we were asked the question. 9% do not live in the city limits, so maybe they own property here, they own a business here, and they wanted to take the survey. So this was not restricted to people who live here or who vote. Do you see yourself in Pataska in the next 5 years? 92% said yes. So I'm working with many of your neighbors, and they cannot say their statistic was not looking like that. So that's something special here. If not, why might you move? So of that 8%, you can see the breakdown. So not hugely significant. I don't know what the 47% of other was, but it necessarily wasn't. These other things were that 8% weren't driving it in a significant way. Do you believe the city of Pataskala has a distinct identity? So you're kind of split 50-50. So that came up in a lot of the conversations we have in the survey. I guess it came up, if you're making a determination on a market decision, you might want to have more than 50% certainty of that bet. So to me, that's kind of something that we need to pay attention to. If you do think it, you have one, what is it? Small town, rural farming community, country community close to the city. What do you think it should be? Some folks said they weren't sure. Family-oriented, rural stays it is, small, quaint. So a lot of the things that maybe are kind of what you would expect coming through there. How important is each factor for the city to consider over the next 20 years? So part of the way we phrased up this question, and I'll talk about it here in a little bit, is as a region, we're expecting about another 1 million people by 2050. So most folks who are in this field within this region are kind of accepting that as the number. So we wanted to know over the next 20 years, what should we be considering it as we are aware that that may be coming? So a balance of conservation and development. Online, that was 3.9%. This was 1 to 5. 5 being very important, 1 being not important. And then public meetings a little bit higher. Redevelop existing properties, it was the same, so that was 3.7 out of 5. Add new commercial, retail, and office, 3.4 online, 3.9 at the public meetings. Create a downtown or a city center, 3.4 online and 4.2 at public meetings. Expand new mixed use areas, so 2.9 and 3.8. Expand new industrial and manufacturing, 2.6 and 3.4. Add new housing, 2.5 and 2.7, which is interesting because in the conversations that was something that was brought up more. And then no growth or development, 1.8 and 1.5. I would say for me, that last one was pretty revealing. Understanding, having some perspective of you and having done this communities like you, sometimes you find that number a lot higher. And so that was something that we thought about and kind of tried to make sense of. But I thought that was pretty interesting. That's kind of the outlier. How important are the following housing characteristics when thinking about future residential growth and development? So we asked things like high quality materials, strong neighborhood character, close to biking and walking trails, rural lifestyle, close to parks, and then a range of housing options. So there you can see the responses to those, with that range being at 3.3. Close to schools, independent or assisted living options, close to commercial amenities, close to adjacent undeveloped farmland. Again, I thought that one might be higher. And then add new housing is 2.5. So back to the number one was design and materials and the neighborhood character. And so, again, I thought this was interesting because this was, the housing options came up a lot in conversation at the public meetings, and people really valuing this came up a lot. So I thought it was interesting it scored a little lower. Rate the type of retail you would like to see in Pataskala, small neighborhood focused retail, the highest at 4.2. Redeveloping your commercial corridors, 3.7. Mixed use retail, office, residential, 2.9, and big box at 1.7. So not a lot of desire to have more big box retail, at least to the people who took this survey. So some of our key findings coming out of this, again, we're layering this information on top of each other. You'll start to see how it builds. The identity thing coming up again, balancing growth with infrastructure, and that growth is not perceived as bad. Now that's my determination from this, but understanding that was a 1.8, I think that's something that we can reasonably say. That quality of life amenities matter, so people want those things as part of where they live. Conservation is important, especially along the north and south corridors. So I'm drawing that from the dot exercise, but I'm also saying that because if you listen to what people value and what they think you are, some type of conservation has to be part of that discussion. Downtown core near municipal complex or existing downtown. Desire for mixed-use walkable central gathering space. So that in part is an interpretation of you need entertainment, you need things to do, and there's only so many ways we can create that from a market perspective. And then need significant change in zoning to align with community aspirations for your desired character. So that's kind of, again, behind the scenes. People aren't talking about your zoning code at these meetings because most people don't understand it that well. But when we look at it, we say, well, there's gonna have to be some change there to achieve these outcomes. So that's really the listening part, summarized in about 15 minutes worth of about 5 months worth of work. The existing conditions is the other piece that we look at. So I always say there's two pieces. There is the intuitive knowledge of the people who live here. That's our steering committee, the people we talk to. And there's the technical side that you need to be aware of if you're making decisions. So this is some of the information that we presented to the committee and we considered as we kind of go down this journey together. The first is the elephant in the room. And we also are working on Insight 2050 with MORPC, so we're pretty close to what's happening related to that initiative and what's anticipated here. But that's a huge number for this region. I mean, if you know, as a region, we're about 2.2 million right now, and adding another million, you know, to get kind of nerdy, we're carrying almost all of Ohio's growth right here. If we took this out of the equation, I think Ohio would actually be anticipating negative growth. And so we're sitting at the epicenter of that. Some of the things that we're bringing to you that we're learning from that other initiative is, well, what's going on with that growth and who's coming here? Doesn't mean you make your decisions necessarily based on it, but it does mean that you need to be aware of it so that you can be informed. This is a big one, and that is that between 2010 and 2030, the number of households without children will make up upwards to 87% of the growth in households in our MSA. So typically that's not really who you've been, right? You haven't built housing here to attract that segment of the market. And as we look ahead, the majority of the growth that we're going to be seeing here is not that, right? Doesn't mean that people aren't living in a bigger house without kids, but looking just at your age cohorts here and who's coming here, this is a big part of the market who I would say probably is not here. The other one is that between 2010, 2030, 56% of the growth in the number of households in our MSA will come from senior households. So, you know, it's kind of the old millennial and boomer conversation. You know, right now they make up 175 million people. Those are the largest two demographics in the history of this country ever to move through the market. And we're seeing that same influence here. And so we're presenting this information from you, and we're bringing you these data sets from the MORPC Insight 2050 initiative. The other one is, and your community talked about this when we talked to them, is, well, where do people want to live, right? So about 56% of Ohioans would like to live in walkable mixed-use communities. Less than 20% of Ohioans currently have the option. So you can see the source there for that resource as well. And so this is another key thing that we want to bring forward to you guys to consider. And some of the stuff actually that your community echoed when we went through what do you value as part of your housing option and where do you want to live. These were some of the things that came through to them as well. On the national stage, 45% of the national population are millennials and boomers. I talked about that. 72% are without children. The graph on the right is showing you where things are trending for the housing preference. And in so many words, there is this trend towards something smaller, more manageable, where people can spend more time doing other things other than maintaining the house and having greater deal flexibility. So you can start to see where things are trending, specifically with the small lot trend, 30 going up to 40% as people are getting older, looking for downsize, something smaller. And the attached also being an option. Obviously there's a dip here, it comes back up again for those that are aging. And then the larger lot being here, peaking in that 30 to 49, which is your largest age cohort right now here in Pataskala. Here's where you guys have been from a population standpoint. Obviously you saw a huge boom up to 2010. You're adding close to 500 people per year. And you kind of flatlined, it went to about 50 people per year from 2010 to 2016. You're sitting around 15,000 people right now. In terms of your housing types, this is the different housing types that you currently have. The yellow is one unit detached, so that's single family. And then we compared you to people around you. So you can see Heath, Reynoldsburg, Groveport, Lincoln County, of how that breaks down. The darker the color, the more dense the housing product type. So kind of fun way to see that spectrum of housing, literally a spectrum of color. And your housing stock's relatively new. So the median year built is 1993. 55% of the buildings were built between 1990 and 2009. So huge boom, and I'm sure many of you were here for that. Just wanted to show you what that looks like again. It's one thing to throw a statistic at somebody, it's another to put it in perspective. So you can see how you compare to Heath, Reynoldsburg, Groveport, the county, and Ohio as a whole. I mean, significantly, you have way newer housing stock than your neighbors. Here's your employment. You can see your top industries there. This was interesting. You have 3,179 total jobs. 86% of folks are working Pataskala residents work outside of the city. So if you live in Pataskala and you're a working person, you're working outside of the city. So there's kind of, we're losing that capture. Unemployment rate's 4%, median household income is $69,000. Again, you're significantly higher than your neighbors. So you're making more on average than your adjoining communities, but much of that tax revenue may not be captured. This is your current land use situation. This is not your zoning. This is just a different way that we code it in GIS, and the auditor feeds information into that system. So you can see 58.6% is in agricultural use, with the remaining 26% being residential. And then you have vacant, parks and open space, industrial, commercial, utilities, big, smaller percentage. So, for most part, you're a bedroom community. So understanding that land use, we wanted to really understand where you can grow. What is your potential? So one of the things we do is we do some mapping to understand where tree cover is. These are constraints: wetlands, streams, floodplains, and your parks. And we kind of layer that in there, and then coming out of that, we say, what can you develop? So in our scenario that we presented to our committee and we looked at, we assume agricultural land is developable, and that's pink. So there's roughly 8,800 acres of land that are developable. 7,500 of those are zoned residential or agricultural. Now, it doesn't mean that somebody sells their farm tomorrow and it's built. But, in the development game, in the land use game, that is something that could be developed. So that's a lot of land. You have 18,000 acres as a community, so it's almost half. So when you look at the actual zoning districts, we wanted to see, okay, well, what does that look like? What can we accommodate? So at full build out, if you built everything out that was in pink under its base zoning, residentially zoned land would accommodate up to, that includes A1, that would accommodate up to 11,342 residents, or roughly 4,500 households. That's if you just built it all out. So if we're doing a plan for 20 years, you got to think, and you look back at your population trend as you hit another upward trajectory, it's not unreasonable to think that you could add a significant amount of density or growth here. So the other thing we did was we said to the committee, well, how do you think you're going to grow and how fast? So looking back in the good years, call them good years, bad years, whatever team you're on, I don't know how to phrase that, but you were seeing about 500 people per year, okay? So that's high growth. And if you look out to 2040, when we're looking about 20 years out for this plan, on that high growth scenario, 500 people per year, that's 26,000 people, okay? And then at the moderate growth rate, we said, well, what's something more moderate? What about 300 per year? And we went out to 2040, you're at about 21,000. And then at the low growth, we said of 100 people per year, you're at 17,000. The committee said we think we're somewhere between that high growth and that moderate growth scenario. So if you remember, if you assumed, if you grew by roughly 300 to 500 people per year, and by 2040 you hit 26, that's pretty close to that 11,000 number, isn't it? Which we said is your build out. So if you do nothing and you see that growth, those growth trends that you saw before, it's potential that you could be built out by 2040. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but that's the way the math looked, at least according to the past. So low, moderate, high, 400, 120, 200 households per year is what you'd be looking at. So if anybody's following your planning commission minutes and watching all of that unfold, you know that 200 households per year, even on the high scenario, is not off the charts. I mean, that could be 1-2 projects a year. They're big subdivisions. So I don't think it's unreasonable to think that you're really towards that higher end, right? This is looking at each scenario individually, showing you by 2030 and then by 2040. So this is the low, 2,000, and then by 2030, under the moderate, you'd have 3,600 additional new people, 1,400 households. By 2040, 6,000 people, 2,600 households. This is moderate. And then on the high, so here we go. This is where things aligned up, right? 1,100 additional people for 4,400 households. So if I went back to that pink map, that's what we said you could have at build out by 2040. So giving you a little snippet there of some of the things that we've been learning and talking through together as a team with the committee. This was kind of fun. This was a really fun as a planner exercise to do, because it's interesting to see where you are and where we're at, the ability to shape the future. I mean, when you saw that pink map, you're say, holy smokes, we really have the opportunity to write the destiny for a lot of these areas. And either we continue how we're doing things and you continue on with the current pattern you have, or you can change it. And when we stopped with the committee, I think steering committee 3 into the last one we had, which was 4, this was where a lot of decisions were being made and things were being talked about. We're starting to put together the plan document itself. And the first chapter, which is up here, is going to summarize all that information we just talked about. The key findings from all of it. And the reason that we're doing that is in the document, which is a legally defensible document for you, you can say, well, look, I want to see that trail of information which led us to the decisions we're making today. And you might want to refer back to that in the future. Say, well, our community said in that survey, 900 people in 2018 said this, and that's why we're making the decisions we are. Following that, you're going to see 3 key chapters: community identity, which is going to talk about your image and brand and this idea of a center. The land use chapter, which will be the holy grail of this document, which will talk about housing, economy, parks and open space, and the all-important future land use map, which I'll show you here in a minute. And then community infrastructure, mobility, utilities, community services, and the topic of sustainability. There'll be an implementation chapter, which is essentially summarizes all those chapters into a table so you can reference it quickly. Each of those chapters will have a goal and then a set of strategies and actions to help support that goal. So, for example, in the image and brand section, I'm not rolling out to you all this information tonight because it'd be overwhelming. You will see it. In that image and brand section, one of the key things is doing an image and brand plan. And so some of that we're going to sprinkle into this initiative from a physical standpoint, but also do you need to do more of a branding and communication strategy as a community so that you're more proactive in controlling who you are, your messaging, your brand, and marketing yourselves. So that would be a strategy, and then there's some actions on how to get there. What we wanted to show you tonight was a look behind the scenes on the land use piece, because I think that's probably the most important piece, the one you may be most interested in. This is your existing zoning map. So I think it's interesting to point out that, you can see the agricultural zoning there, which is this huge swath, followed by rural residential, which is that green, which really makes up, I don't know the exact percentage off the top of my head, a lot of your property. And then followed by this medium low density residential, which is this color in here. So that's the majority of land in there. And then you can see the other zonings in there as well. So what I'm going to show you may not be radically different from this. And I don't think we need it to be radically different than this. But it is somewhat different in that the way we're rolling this out speaks to your future character. Is there any way can you guys see that okay? Or is it just my bad eyes? Trying to see that far. This is the draft future land use map as it sits now. There are two very large districts in here. I will point out that we did make a decision to blur the lines. I know that seems like a small thing, but we wanted to have some flexibility in here so that it wasn't like that parcel's this and that parcel's that. This map is really supposed to have a spirit to it, so you want to have a little flexibility in there versus a hard line right there. And really what we want to communicate is the potential and the expectation. So these first two districts, conservation rural and conservation suburban, I'll talk through these in a second, are essentially conservation, they're identified as conservation districts. And I'll explain that as I go. Then you have this orange area here, which is medium density residential. This is pretty much what it already is. So I would say there's not a lot of change there. Then we have this medium density mixed use district in here, which is this orange here, and then down around 310. So this allows for different uses. Mixed use in this case, folks, does not mean it has to be vertical. It's horizontal. If it wants to be vertical, it can be, but it's horizontal. The other one is this village mixed use center. So the idea here is, can we create potential for a center outside of the old village? And the reason that we identified this location is because of this complex. Psychologically, it is a center because of the center of government, and that's oftentimes where people identify with the downtown. But also, as you're trying to create something new and create this new center that has entertainment, has a mix of uses, I think that this becomes a very important historic district, but the potential to create something a little bit more vibrant, new, walkable, this really becomes that location. So if you're going to have that in Pataskala, this is the location we're calling out for it, and then surrounding it with kind of lower intensity use. Then we have neighborhood commercial, which is this color here. So you see this out by Summit and Broad. So this is lower intensity commercial uses. The red is community commercial, so that is regional commercial uses. We have flex industrial, which is this purple color here. And then in the center of that, what we're calling an innovation district, which allows for R&D, manufacturing, light industrial tech. And then you'll notice this district up here that we also call that. And so the reason that was identified as part of this is that understanding what's happening to your north, the question was brought up, could there be a windfall where we capitalize on some of that too? And if so, does it make sense to have it there? And the committee agreed that that could be a location where you might see that type of use. So a little bit quick deeper dive, and I'll be quiet in about 5 minutes. Here's that conservation rural district. So this is offering different housing types that are clustered within a larger site to reduce land consumption, preserve natural features. So the idea here with this district and the next one I'm going to talk about, actually with all of them, none of them, the way we're recommending it, are taking away development. They would take away development rights. So it would give you direction to maintain those development rights, but direct people to cluster those uses. In this case, what we're saying is protecting a minimum of 50% open space. So the idea there is you create more open spaces, you protect your character, you build less infrastructure, so you have to maintain less infrastructure, so fiscally that's a better decision. And you allow for these different housing types, whether it's attached or single family, to take place. So that's 1 unit per 10 acres. And what we're saying is, right now, could you get more if you did extra, if you conserved more open space, or if you did some type of wetland mitigation, or you're doing additional some sustainability things. So that is that district. Conservation suburban is a little bit more intense from a density standpoint, so that's 1 unit for 2 acres. This pretty much lines up with your underlying zoning, but again, we're saying future development in this case, we want to see you protect 50% of that as open space. So if you came in at 100 acres, 50% should be dedicated to open space, and then 1 unit per 2 acres, you get 50 units on 50 acres. Make sense? You could do more. And so, one of the conversation that has come up is, well, we like large lots. We think that's the way to go here. And even in this district, you can see that 1 unit per 2 acres is not super dense. And if you protect 50, I go back to the 100 acre scenario, if you protect 50% of that, you're still essentially 1 unit per 1 acre. In the market, that's still perceived as a pretty big lot. So then this was medium density residential over here. This is not very different than underlying zoning. So this is 1 to 3 stories. You're going to attach, detach, multifamily. What this is saying here is that we don't go out tomorrow and rezone everything, but we want future land use in this area to follow this character. Okay? If you did want to rezone it, in each one of these districts, you should start to comply with the purpose and intent of the future land use map. This was the medium density mixed use. So this is where we could see both residential and neighborhood focused commercial in this district, kind of around that core that primarily serves residents within the surrounding neighborhoods or the city of Pataskala. So this is 1 to 3 stories. You can start to see the character of that development in there. These are just character images that we put together. The different uses we think could make sense there: detached, attached, single family, multifamily, retail, office. This is the neighborhood commercial over here around Summit. These should be smaller scale neighborhood commercial type uses that serve that community and that side of town on the west side. And then community commercial, so this was a key point. I'm trying to leave myself 15 minutes, so I'm watching. I think I have about 3 minutes left. I'm going to make it. One of the questions, even in our committee, that came up at the last meeting was, did we allow enough room for another Myers or another Kroger? And according to this draft map, this is the area where you would want to see that. That orange area you saw here could have some commercial, but we're not talking Kroger's or Myers. We're talking something that's a Fresh Time, Aldi, that scale or less. No big boxes. But if you go back to what your community said, that was a very low priority on driving that land use type. And quite honestly, if you want to protect your rural character, stripping out Broad with big boxes is probably not the way to go. Also, if you're concerned about the traffic on Broad. So the question you have to ask yourself is that enough? Are we comfortable going to places around us? This was the Flex Industrial District here, so big income generating uses. This is the Innovation District, another one that's going to generate a lot of income for the city. This should be of no surprise where this one sits. We did discuss where we drew the line with this at our last meeting. And then the village mixed use is essentially a town center. So, I had some character images up there of what that could look like. You might recognize that one as Creekside, Levis Commons, components of Easton, small mixed use district where you do a lot of activities. You could potentially build a large central park where you do Christmas tree lightings, host events, that type of thing. Part of what we're saying here is that we don't abandon the old village. The old village becomes part of your historic district and actually connects to this. But the potential for that to get redeveloped quickly, easily in the marketplace probably is going to be a very, very long, slow play. But this might be something that if you want to get there more quickly, the market could respond to and create that center. Parks and open space being the last one. These are essentially your parks and open spaces, so not a lot of crazy stuff there. The last piece is greenways. So we talk about those conservation districts. One of the things that we've identified here with the underlining environmentally sensitive areas is that when those areas do create conservation components, they should connect. And as over time, you should create this green web within the city so that you have a network of bike trails, greenways that people can move, animals can move, and a lot of those you'll notice follow corridors. So you create a nice view shed into them, but they also connect environmental features like woodlands and wetlands and that type of thing. So this goes along with the future land use map. So our next step is finish up the plan. We have a lot of work to do on our end in the next 30, 60 days. We'll have another meeting with our steering committee. After that, when the final draft plan is done, we'll host an open house, and then we'll come back to you guys with the final plan. 46 minutes. That's right. Questions for me?
Well, first of all, nicely done, and don't sell yourself short. I know that was a lot of work, and then you dumped it into 45 minutes, but again, I was impressed with how you've engaged with the community, farmers market, stuff like that, so this is all good information. You folks have any questions, input, comments?
It was interesting. I enjoyed it.
It was interesting. Mrs. Carter?
Was there any discussion on the committee that most of the development of any sort, or shopping or anything, even what would be considered as a center of town, is still further to the east? So it would, people on the west side would probably still go west for shopping, like to Meyer or any of that type of stuff?
Yes. We talked about that at our last meeting, which was what, last week? And, you know, the question was, do we want to create more places for big boxes? And your committee kind of came to the conclusion that their paths to get those goods and services they were okay with. And that along Broad, it was hard for them, I think, to identify, oh, that's our new location if we went on the Kroger and a Giant Eagle. So yeah, it was talked about. The idea of kind of growing that Broad and Summit with more neighborhood retail, I think, was there to kind of serve the west side a little bit more a convenience standpoint. Clearly, they're closer to stuff down on Broad, a lot of stuff there, and that you have this other commercial center in the east. But yeah, it was talked about. Especially, and also what's going to happen on 310 was talked about. And where is that growth going to stop? And are we going to see another retail outlet right there that's going to serve us? So do we need to play that role? So from an income standpoint, you know, no matter how you slice it, in most parts of Ohio, retail tends not to be your big winner from a tax standpoint. And so that was talked about too.
Anything else? Well, we certainly,
Good job.
again, appreciate the update.
I was ready for a whole battery.
I think we have to absorb it a little bit.
You do, I know, it's a lot of information. And certainly I can make this presentation available, we can give it to Scott, who can send it out to everybody to look at it. And thank you for putting together a good committee. They've been great to work with.
Thank you.
As a group, so.
Thank
Thank you very much.
Great.
So now we move to citizens' comments, and these citizens' comments would be, of course, surrounding this special council meeting. So any questions or comments or input would be about the comprehensive plan. Does anybody wish to speak on the comprehensive plan? Need your name and address.
Yes, my name is Ruth Ann Murdoch. I live at 14425 Cleveland Road.
Okay.
It might not address this issue, but with his comments and all that, as he says, there's going to be more places of companies, residents moving in. Hospital's getting bigger. Been a resident 45 years, all my life. My grandfather was county commissioner, late Carl Wheeler. I walked down between Summit and Taylor Road. A lot of people had the same concern. Our road is very narrow. It was not meant for heavy traffic. And I have a petition with a lot of signatures of names of people's addresses and saying that we feel like there should be a change to pursue on Cleveland Road. We're thinking of a dead end or a loop or some like speed bumps because traffic just flies down there. Someone's gonna eventually get hurt, property could get damaged, animals have always been killed. You know, there's nothing we can do about that, but we sure can prevent someone getting injured or killed or property being damaged. So to protect us, I have included Mr. B.G. King, and I can hand you this with the signatures of the concern on Cleveland Road.
Okay.
So,
Thank you very
Actually,
much.
if you could give that to Kathy Hoskinson, our council clerk, she'll be able to distribute it. Council?
thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your time, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other comments on the comprehensive plan? All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved. Second. Moved by Mr. Hickens, seconded by Mr. Barstow. Discussion and roll.
Carter,
Yes.
Walter,
Yes.
Powell,
Yes.
Barstow,
Yes.
Hayes,
Yes.
Hicken.
Yes.
Okay, meeting adjourned. Next meeting in 10 minutes. Nope.